My name's Cline, and this is my story. I can remember back when I was young, trying to describe my family unit. One word that always comes up is dysfunctional. There was a lot of disagreements in the family, a lot of alcoholism, drug abuse. Of course, being as young as I was, I really didn't know any better. I just figured, that's the way the world was. I can remember growing up and, the fond memories of the holidays with all of my family gathering together, typically in a very small room. The laughter, the fun would always eventually end up to an argument, drunkenness, sometimes even fights. Probably somewhere around the time when I was 6, maybe, my mom got married. And it was new to me because up until this point, I didn't have a father figure. I never met my dad. I didn't have a clue as to who he was, where he was, if he existed. So this was my father figure, and I never really learned much looking up to him. There wasn't a fine display of being romantic to my mom. I didn't see how to treat a woman. I didn't see how to treat others. So I remember being pretty confused throughout that whole situation. Never really had a good relationship with him. But I can remember while I was confused at a lot of things, I was still searching. I was still desiring something in my life. So I remember trying to be real close to everybody, trying to stay close to them, trying to talk to them, trying to love them. Something that I had blocked out for many years of my life was the fact that I was molested as a small child by somebody that was supposed to be close to me. It was outside the home, but it was still somebody that should have been close. And the more that came back to my mind, the more that I realized that I was confused even more. I was hurt. But I was simply told to be quiet. So in my silence, even at a very, very young age, I began to grow bitter and angry. But I was still a small child. I couldn't rebel, but yet in my mind I was broken. And it seemed like once I had got over that hump of being violated by somebody that was close to me, started seeing more and more displays of dysfunction in my life. And as the years rolled by, I can remember being even more angry and confused and starting fights and, things like that. But there were still people in my life that I tried so hard to be close to. What I was given in return for that closeness and that innocence was more violation. I can remember being yelled at. I can remember everybody else being yelled at. It seemed like the anger was a norm. When I was about 12, my mom got a divorce and we moved to another town. I can remember so hard trying to put things behind me, but deep down, I still had a lot of anger and bitterness and, just remembering everything from when I was young up until that point in my life. I desired to fit in. I desired to have that connection. I can remember at the age of 14, I began drinking out in the parking lots with a couple of older people. In the place where I lived, that began to be the pot for which the storm that I would live for the next couple of years would brew. That's where my taste and eventual passion for alcohol began. At the age of 14, I lost my virginity. And everything around me was teaching me that I was not to respect women. And that's what I believe because I never had anybody in my life to tell me any different. I can remember driving home drunk for the first time about a week and a half after I got my license at the age of 16. And at that point, my taste for alcohol had grown to the point that it was almost daily. I can remember sneaking into my room, keeping it underneath my mattress, taking it to school. It was a habit. My connection to sex was built upon everything that I knew, everything that I saw around me, the people I hung out with. And the two just kind of went hand in hand. I can remember being introduced to pornography for the first time. It was defined to me as something to watch for fun. I could tell the more I watched it, the more it just reiterated that women were nothing but a sex object for my gratification. So it seemed like my addiction was starting to grow stronger rather than ease up at all. I never really got along with my mom very well. She had remarried when I was 15. I didn't get along with my stepdad at all. I was just wasn't a good kid. But I remember sitting in classroom one day, and we had a speaker come in. It was a guest, and he was a Marine. And he came in, he was talking to us about fighting for our country and being able to be on the rifle range and, fire the rifles, letting your anger out, being able to run and go do PT and lift weights and all of these things that were appealing to me because I was an angry kid and I had all this stuff bottled up inside me. I remember going home and talking about it with my friends and family, and I never really got a whole lot of support in it, but yet, everybody told me they was proud. And while I was gone, I remember every Sunday in the beginning trying to go to church and get my life right, but yet I was lost as all get out. Then at some point something changed in my mind. It seemed like the more I tried, the worse that my mind got. So I quit going to church altogether. I quit listening to any of my friends who tried to give me any biblical insight. It's funny, I had fabricated this stupid idea of religion in my head. And while it seemed like my mind and my actions just continued to spiral in the wrong direction, I had one person in my life that he said something about Jesus to me every day. And at the time, I didn't want to hear it. I was, oh, come on, man. I don't want to hear all that mess. But every time I would try to explain to him something that was going on in my life, or even, my twisted idea of religion, he would remind me of how much it was just like Jesus, or it was just like the Trinity, and I was so confused because I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. Nobody ever told me anything like this. And I lost touch with him when I got out. And I came home. And it was probably the heaviest I had ever drank in my life. Going to parties, just being around the wrong people, being addicted to pornography, using girls for sex. It wasn't real pretty. It's nothing that I'm proud of. And I really screwed up for the next little bit. I got married for all the wrong reasons. There was never really a full commitment from either of us in the marriage. But I remember one day I had went to church, and I gained this head knowledge of who Jesus was. And I became very emotional. I couldn't see to make it down to the pastor because I had so many tears in my eyes. And it seemed like while I was talking to him that he was accepting me, but I didn't hear anything that he said about God or Jesus or anything like that. It was just that this pastor was accepting me. And I remember back to when I was a little kid and I wanted to be accepted so bad. So the more that I would try to go to church, I started realizing that the more things that I said that aligned with what they believed, the more they acted like they liked me. So for the next few years, I played this game of going to church and putting on this facade that I was a powerful man of God, in quotations. So I played this game on Sundays and on Wednesdays. And I got these people and they'd point at me when I'd go in the church and they'd say, hey, there he is. And I was so excited because I had this acceptance from people. And I strive so hard to have the approval of man that I never even thought about Jesus. I never even strived to have a relationship with Jesus. Nothing. On the days that I wasn't around those people, I lived like hell. Nobody in my life, it seemed like, understood what I was going through. They didn't understand who I was. There was no commitment in marriage, in life, not from anybody. I found myself praying at night to a God that I didn't know. Every night before I went to bed, I would put my hands up on the sink and I would look in the mirror and I would pray that God would just take my life, just to end it. I didn't want to wake up the next day because I was still addicted to alcohol. I was still addicted to pornography. I just didn't want to live. It had reached a point in my marriage that instead of both parties just living in infidelity and bitterness, we went our separate ways. That was when I began to really think about life. I began to try to evaluate and analyze things in my life to try to figure out what I was missing. When me and Jennifer started dating, I was a very, very, very damaged person. I had a lot of baggage, probably more than she was expecting. But the amazing thing about that was, even with all my baggage and my damages, when I was lost and couldn't analyze things myself and couldn't figure things out, she would take the time to calm me down, to analyze what the problems were, and to just talk to me. And there were many nights that we spent, and she was just pouring into my life, talking to me, giving me positivity. And while we were dating, we decided we were going to get married, but we wanted something different than anything that we had had before, anything that the world had seen. We wanted something that was completely different. We decided to base everything on God. And we had started going back to church. We had started, doing things with, the Christian community, but I still never really understood what it was to change. A lot of my addictions had begun to subside, and that's only because, I was surrendering to God, but I still didn't have a relationship with Him like I should. I can remember driving to church and listening to worldly music. I can remember going to church and watching things on TV that just weren't godly. And then one day, I really wish I could say it was as emotional and tear-jerking as the day that I realized what God had done to me and I came to the head knowledge of who He was, but it's not. This was a more intimate and personal moment with me and Jesus. I can remember driving home that day, and I had a lot on my mind. I had a lot of things just going on. And I remember pulling into the driveway, and I think it was Limp Bizkit playing on the radio, some real loud, violent, vulgar music. I remember reaching up and turning the music down Turning the ignition switch off, I sat back in the seat for a split second. I heard a voice say, "Change." And I was thinking to myself, change what? And at this point, I knew it was God because nobody was around. But I could hear it plain as day. And I, change what? And I was reminded that if I'm striving for different results, I can't do the same thing that I've been doing all my life. I can't follow the path that I had all my life and expect anything to be different. So as I sat there in silence, Jesus just poured into my heart that moment. Those few moments, few seconds, sitting there in that van in the silence on that day seemed like forever. And it was at that moment I realized that my life had to change, that I accepted the fact that Jesus was the only way I was ever going to change anything. Jesus was the only way I was going to be able to conquer anything in life, any of my addictions, any of my struggles. Jesus was going to be what was going to pull me through. And it was at that point that everything in my life started to change. My relationship with Jennifer started to grow, started to flourish. I started to get closer and closer to God. And I noticed that I was going through that transformation of what I used to be called as the powerful man of God who was a failure to a man of a powerful God who could do anything. And I'm at a point now in my life that there's no way that I could possibly not believe in Jesus. There's no way that I could possibly not believe in the miracles because I've been a receiver of the miracles, the things that God has brought me through. I remember 9 days after we got married, beautiful wedding ceremony. Everything was dedicated to God. I washed my wife's feet. I dedicated my life to her. 9 days after that, my back goes out. The surgeons told me I'm probably not going to walk again. Everything in my lower spine is jacked up. I have permanent nerve damage, this and that. Very slim chance you're going to walk again. But after that surgery, the doctor came out and said it just didn't do any good. Said your spine was just intertwined with scar tissue, and if you walk, it's a miracle of God. God performed that miracle. I was walking five hours after that surgery up all around the hospital. That was the first thing that just God smacked me in the face with and said, there you go. Another thing that's awesome about that was the way that I was able to afford that surgery. It was a lady from out of state. She wanted no glory because God told her to do it. It's my favorite story to tell, but she sent me a Western Union overnight with the money to pay for my surgery, with a little note that said, "May God bless you and your family." That's when I knew God's hands were on my life. And there was no turning back. I didn't want to live the way I had lived. I wanted to turn my life completely over to God because He's performing miracles. He's talking to me. He's touching me. Fast forward a couple of years, and there was an accident, and I ended up having a traumatic brain injury with a tumor that began to grow after the injury on the back of my brain. And after going to a neurologist for about two and a half years, I finally asked him, I said, "Doc, why you keep wanting me to have all these MRIs done? And he said, because I don't want to say yet. I don't want to say until I'm sure. He said, I have one more MRI and I'm going to send you to do a spinal tap. And if the tumor has grown again, after a steady growth, we're going to have to go in and get it. So I went and had the spinal tap done, and something happened and I passed out several hours afterwards. But during that process, it was 24 hours. I was coherent here. I understood everything that was going on around me, but I could not speak. I could not open my eyes. And I'm not quite sure what God was doing at that time, but we looked at the MRI images from the past, and on that spot on my brain, there was a little white cross. And I knew right then God was all in it. So when we went back to the neurologist after that last MRI to figure out what was going to happen, whether they was going to have to go in and get that off my brain or, just leave it because it was there. God took it away. My doctor was looking at the images and he was spinning the images around. He's like, I think it was right. It was gone. Praising God. So I'm in a situation where I can't say that I don't believe in God. God has just blown my mind with some of the things that he's done in life, the miracles that I've received, the miracles that I've watched others receive. When you stand on the fact that you're redeemed, when you look at what you've been lifted up out of, what you've been rescued from, what you've been saved from, when you realize that Jesus died for everything you've ever done, you will not turn back to that life. You won't turn your back on Jesus and go back to it. That I don't. It's physically impossible for me. God is good.